What if the reason you feel lost isn't because you made wrong choices, but because the psychological world shifted and no one told you? There's a quiet sentence a lot of people are carrying inside themselves, but rarely say out loud. It sounds something like, I don't understand why I feel so lost. My life looks fine on the outside, but internally, nothing feels anchored the way it used to. If that's you, you're not alone, and you're not imagining it. A lot of smart, capable adults are walking around with a sense of disorientation they can't quite name. And there's a psychological reason for it that has nothing to do with personal failure. We were raised with a particular map of how life works, a map built on stability, predictability, clear roles, and a sense that effort would produce reliable outcomes. You study, you work hard, you choose a path, you build a life, and it more or less holds. The world you were trained for rewarded consistency, long term planning, and the ability to stay steady. It was a world of linear progression. But the psychological terrain underneath those assumptions has shifted, and it shifted faster than our identities could adjust. We are trying to navigate a quantum world with a Newtonian map. And when your map doesn't match the territory, panic is the natural response. What people call being lost is often an identity that was built for an earlier psychological landscape, a landscape that no longer exists. The ground didn't disappear, it changed shape, and your mind hasn't been taught how to walk on it yet. The first rupture most people feel is incoherence. In the past, you see, life had a rhythm you could trust. There was downtime, there were predictable social cues, there was room to recover. You had a sense of who you were because the environment stayed relatively stable around you. Today, your mind absorbs more information in a week than previous generations processed in months. Your emotional system is saturated all the time. The boundary between your thoughts, your identity, and your environment is thinner than ever. And when the world becomes loud, the inner world becomes blurry. This is where many high functioning adults start to question themselves. They say things like, I used to be confident. I used to make decisions quickly. I used to feel grounded. What's happening to me? The answer is not weakness. It's cognitive and emotional overload. Most adults have never been taught how to filter psychological noise, so the mind starts overthinking to compensate. Overthinking isn't a flaw, it's a safety mechanism. Your brain is trying to think its way back to safety. It believes that if it just analyzes the data enough, it will find a pattern, and if it finds a pattern, it can predict the future. But in an unpredictable world, analysis loops back on itself. Analysis can't solve ambiguity, so the more you think, the more lost you feel. There's also a deeper identity shock happening. For years, smart people built their sense of self around the idea that competence creates stability. When the world becomes unstable anyway, that identity is threatened. And when your identity is threatened, your inner landscape becomes unpredictable. You start doubting your instincts, questioning your path, wondering whether you're missing something everyone else seems to know. This is not a personal crisis, it's a cultural one. Another layer of feeling lost comes from something people rarely talk about: the grief of outgrowing your own life. This is the internal experience beneath so many people's confusion. You build a life based on the version of yourself you were 10 or 15 years ago. And then one day you wake up realizing you're not that person anymore. Your values shifted, your emotional needs changed, but the structure of your life remained frozen in the past. And this is often where the guilt sets in. You look at the life you built, the career, the stability, and you think, I should be grateful for this. But gratitude doesn't erase incongruence. You haven't failed. You aren't ungrateful. You've simply evolved, and your environment hasn't caught up yet. People confuse that mismatch with being lost. But growth always feels disorienting before it feels clarifying. You're not supposed to feel comfortable when your identity reorganizes itself. You're supposed to feel unsettled, restless, even strangely detached from the things you once cared about. That's not collapse, that's transition. There's also a psychological fatigue that comes from living in a culture of constant comparison. When every moment of your life is silently measured against everyone else's highlight reel, Your internal compass gets replaced by external noise. You lose track of what you want because you're too aware of what you're supposed to want. Your sense of identity gets pulled outward instead of anchored inward. And without an internal anchor, you will feel lost no matter how much you have achieved. So, what do you do with all this? You don't fix it, you understand it. Feeling lost is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It's a signal that your mind is trying to reorganize itself around a new psychological reality. The solution isn't to force clarity, it's to rebuild a deeper kind of coherence. That begins with a practice of emotional simplicity. We have to stop engaging in the story of our feelings and just feel the sensation. Instead of asking, what does this feeling mean for my future? Or what does this say about my marriage? You simply ask, what does this feel like right now? You turn down the volume on interpretation. You let yourself sit with one or two raw truths rather than 20 competing narratives. Most people don't need more insight, they need less internal clutter. It also means reconnecting with your internal reference points. What matters to you? Not because it looks impressive or productive, but because it feels aligned. What gives you energy instead of draining it? What feels honest instead of performative? What feels like yours instead of borrowed? Additionally, you rebuild a sense of direction by loosening your grip on certainty. Uncertainty is not a threat, it's an environment. The more skilled you become at moving through it, the less lost you feel. We are living in a cultural moment where the old psychological assumptions are dissolving and the new ones are still taking shape. If you feel unsteady, it's not because you're behind. It's because you're living through a transition in how identity, meaning, and emotional life are formed. You're not failing, you're adapting. And this uncomfortable, messy, confusing sensation, this is exactly what growth feels like from the inside.